Hey guys, tonight we begin with something equal parts pungent and peculiar. The real story behind Elizabethan hygiene. You're waking up in 16th century England, and before you've even opened your eyes, your mouth tastes like damp bread left under a stable door. There's a sour fuzz clinging to your tongue, and whatever's happening in the back of your throat is definitely not medically approved. Welcome to the morning breath of the gentry, because even the wealthy couldn't quite escape the swampy ecosystem forming inside their mouths overnight. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, let me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. I love seeing who's dozing off from where. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You sit up in bed, or what passes for one straw mattress creaky frame, and a quilt that smells faintly of wet dog and antique cheese. It's cold. The chamber pot is sloshing nearby from someone else's early morning contribution. Lovely. But the real insult hits when you open your mouth. This isn't just I forgot to brush bad. This is I've got a biofilm colony plotting a rebellion on my molars bad. In the Elizabethan age, no one brushed their teeth first thing in the morning. In fact, toothbrushes, at least the kind we know, didn't exist for most of England. You might rinse with wine if you're posh. If you're poor, it's a quick finger scrub, and hope the vinegar from yesterday's stale bread killed something. There's no minty freshness, no flossing, no tongue scraping, just a mouthful of bacterial ambition. And you're not alone in this. Your entire household wakes up smelling like last night's pottage reheated in a boot. Queen Elizabeth herself reportedly had blackened, rotting teeth by her later years, the result of too much sugar and not enough dental sense. Still, blackened teeth became something of a status symbol, proof you could afford the good read bad stuff. Historians still argue whether her dental decline affected her speech or diet in public, but it certainly didn't stop the fashion from catching on. So yes, you roll out of bed already losing the oral hygiene game. Your breath could wilt a daisy at 10 paces, but remember, you're in good company. Shakespeare probably had breath that could clear a theater, nobles with powdered wigs and pearls, just fancy-smelling halitosis. And if you're unlucky enough to have a toothache, the solution involves a heated iron poker, a leather strap to bite, and a friend who owes you a really big favor. As you stumble across the rush-covered floor, you glance at the water jug. It's got a layer of mystery slime floating on top. Do you rinse your mouth with it, maybe? Do you trust it? Absolutely not. Most water sources were riddled with bacteria, and boiling water wasn't routine. Instead, people often relied on ale or wine to cleanse, or at least blur the edges of hygiene. There were attempts, sure. Some mixed honey with herbs like rosemary or mint for breath fresheners. A sprig of parsley might be chewed after meals, practical and pleasantly grassy. But brushing not part of the cultural toolkit yet. If anything, they feared too much cleaning would weaken the gums. Like scrubbing paint off an old wall, eventually it just crumbles. In fact, hygiene was often tied to balance rather than bacteria. The humoral theory dominated medicine at the time. Your body was a stew of 4 fluids: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. A foul mouth. Probably too much black bile. Or maybe your spleen's just being dramatic again. Germ theory. That's a few hundred years and a lot of suffering away. Let's not forget the quirky solutions. Some people believed that rubbing their teeth with burnt rosemary ash could ward off decay. Others swore by powdered cuttlefish bone. And then there's the truly delightful idea of using urine. Yes, human urine, aged like a fine wine, was considered a whitening agent in some beauty regimens. Scholars still debate whether this was a common practice in England or more typical of Roman tradition, but either way, it's notable. You pull on your doublet or gown layers, stiff with yesterday's sweat and perfumed attempts at denial, and join the others by the hearth. No one mentions the smell. Why would they? It's universal. Instead, they sip their ale, break their bread, and accept that their mouths are tiny, warm crime scenes. And it wasn't just the peasants who suffered. Even courtiers, with their elaborate attire and delicate lace rarely brushed. Mouthwashes existed, but they were more ritual than remedy. One recipe from the time included vinegar, myrrh, and rosewater, a scent explosion that still couldn't hide decay. The resulting aroma, floral doom. What's most astonishing is how long everyone lived with this. You'd think widespread gum disease would spark some sort of revolution. But the truth is, few lived long enough for dental hygiene to be their biggest concern. You'd lose your teeth, sure, but you'd probably lose a few siblings to the plague or contaminated ale before that molar finally gave out. And so, you start your day. Your mouth tastes like old stew, your breath could scare a falcon off its perch, and your neighbors aren't doing any better. You smile at them anyway, because in Elizabethan England, that was just the way things were. Yellow teeth, brown teeth, no teeth, it all meant you were still breathing. And that was victory enough. You shuffle past the hearth, tugging at your collar in hopes of fresh air, but the thick wool only redirects the scent of your own mouth back into your nose. It's time to clean your teeth. Well, clean might be a strong word. What you're about to do is more akin to medieval maintenance work than anything resembling modern dental care. There's no porcelain sink, no toothbrush, not even a cheerful tube of minty paste. Instead, you reach for your chew stick, a small, frayed twig of hazelwood or rosemary. You gnaw at one end until it softens and frays like a plant-based Q-tip. Then you scrub your teeth with it. Kind of. The technique is somewhere between brushing and fencing with your gums. If you're slightly more affluent, you might use a linen cloth to rub your teeth with a powder of crushed eggshells ashes and maybe a hint of burnt bread. It's gritty, vaguely salty, and you can practically hear your enamel weeping. The rich occasionally threw in cloves or mint leaves for flavor, but they weren't brushing to sparkle, they were brushing to survive another supper. Toothpaste, that's centuries away. Instead, the go-to paste in Elizabethan times often involved salt vinegar, and sometimes even soot. Yes, soot as in fireplace scrapings. The logic, if it burns clean wood, it'll clean your teeth. Historians still debate whether this actually did more harm than good, especially since soot could wear down enamel and blacken the teeth further. Ironically, a blackened smile was already becoming fashionable among sugar-loving elites. So, win-win. Let's talk sugar. The Tudors loved it, especially in the form of candied fruits, marzipan, and those cursed comfits, little sugar-coated seeds they popped like medieval Tic Tacs. Only they didn't freshen breath so much as start the slow, inevitable march toward tooth rot. Queen Elizabeth herself reportedly had a sweet tooth of legendary proportion, often chewing on sugarcane as if it were a vegetable. By her later years, her gums were so swollen and her teeth so decayed that foreign dignitaries commented on her black stumps. Politely, of course. Of course, the average peasant didn't have access to sugar in quantities high enough to rot their molars out. Their problem was more basic: no real tools, poor nutrition, and a life expectancy that didn't prioritize long-term oral strategy. Teeth fell out, pain happened, and if the rot got bad enough, extraction by force. With pliers, from the blacksmith, the very same guy who shoes horses. That guy. Imagine it. No anesthesia, no antiseptic, just a wooden chair, a rusty tool, and someone yelling, "Hold still," while three others pin you down. If you didn't pass out from the pain, you'd faint from the infection later. No dental follow-up, no soothing broth, just a gaping socket, and a warning to chew on the other side for a while. Teeth weren't precious. They were obstacles to be yanked once they betrayed you. Oh, and braces hilarious. If your teeth were crooked, they stayed crooked. You might be told to chew bark to toughen your jaw, or rinse with wine to harden your gums. But any real correction was fantasy. There are obscure historical references to golden wires being used by ancient civilizations, but by the Elizabethan era, dental alignment was less cosmetic and more cosmic luck. Now about that breath. If you thought your earlier morning wake-up call was offensive, this is where things get creative. Some people used little pouches of herbs, rosemary cloves, and sage tied to a ribbon and worn around the neck or tucked into a sleeve. These pomanders worked less like deodorizers and more like desperate smoke screens. Others chewed cardamom or fennel seeds. If you were really trying, you might rinse with vinegar or wine steeped with herbs. Again, ritual over results. The fringe weirdness didn't stop there. Folk remedies abounded, passed down by grandmothers with questionable motives. Some swore by rubbing their teeth with a mix of honey and ashes. Others insisted on mashing a frog and pressing it to the jaw to draw out infection. Historians still argue whether these practices were regional quirks or widespread beliefs, but honestly, if you're frog mashing for a toothache, you're not exactly working from a place of dental confidence. Let's not forget the traveling tooth drawers. These were not licensed professionals. They were closer to traveling performers. Part dentist, part juggler, part con man. They set up shop in the town square with colorful banners and jars of pulled teeth, promising instant relief and usually delivering immediate trauma. For a coin or two, they'd yank out your aching tooth, maybe sell you a tincture of mercury or lead to keep the rot out, and then vanish before anyone realized they'd also stolen 3 chickens. And if you happened to lose multiple teeth, which you would, your options for replacement were bleak. Dentures did exist, but only for the very rich. And even then, they were made from wood, ivory, or teeth pulled from dead soldiers. You heard that right. Your fake smile might be built from battlefield leftovers. They didn't fit well. They stank, and they hurt, but they looked slightly less horrifying in candlelight, and that's what mattered. So you finish your morning ritual by rubbing your gums with a mint leaf spit discreetly into the corner of the hearth and breathe a sigh of relief. At least it smells better than before. Sort of. Your mouth still tastes like something crawled in, died, and paid rent. But hey, you've done what you can. You step outside into the muddy street, give a nod to your neighbor, and smile what teeth remain stained and uneven peek through. And no one flinches, because theirs look the same. This is Elizabethan England, where teeth are tools until they betray you, and hygiene is measured by what doesn't immediately kill you. You step out into the damp morning fog, clutching your cloak tighter. The air smells like wet straw, wood smoke, and something else, something deeply unwashed. You'd like to think it's the neighbor's pigs, but deep down, you know it's just people. Because here in Elizabethan England, bathing isn't a daily or even weekly event. If you're lucky, you bathe once a month. If you're poor, it might be once a season. And no, there's no hot water waiting. The idea of washing yourself thoroughly every day wasn't just unrealistic, it was practically taboo. Many people, especially in the lower classes, believed that bathing too often could open the pores and let disease in. And in fairness, with the water quality of the time, they weren't entirely wrong. Historians still argue whether this fear of water-based illness came from plague outbreaks or older Galenic medical ideas, but either way, the result was the same people skipped the tub. When you do decide to wash, the process is involved. First, you need water. That means dragging a bucket to the well or river where the water's been generously seasoned with algae runoff and whatever the horses left behind. Then you haul it back, heat it slowly over the hearth, and pour it into a wooden tub. Now remember, this isn't your private spa. That tub might be shared with the rest of your family, one after the other, oldest to youngest. By the time it's your turn, you're basically sitting in broth. Soap, if you have any, is handmade harsh and smells like ashes and animal fat. Because that's exactly what it is. Lye-boiled tallow and whatever herbs someone had on hand. It doesn't lather, it scrapes. You rub it over your skin like a woodworker sanding down a bench, and then hope there's enough clean water left to rinse the sting away. For the wealthy, bathing is slightly more refined. You might have servants heat the water and fill a tub in your chamber. There are perfumed oils, dried rose petals, and even lemon water if you're feeling extravagant. Queen Elizabeth reportedly preferred dry washing, having her skin wiped with linen cloths soaked in wine or vinegar, a kind of proto-sponge bath. Practical, yes, but not foolproof. Under the perfume and silk, there were still layers of accumulated grime. If you're a peasant, though, your options are dirtier. Rivers are technically available, but only in summer, and even then they're public. You'd be scrubbing beside a dozen others, surrounded by livestock laundry and curious children. And even if you find privacy, you won't find warmth. The Thames in April is not what you'd call inviting. There's also a religious element to all this. Cleanliness of the soul was prioritized far above the body. You could stink to high heaven as long as you confessed and attended Mass. Monks bathed, yes, but not always out of hygiene. Some did it ritually. Others only bathed feet, and many believed that modesty meant covering the body, not scrubbing it. Of course, there were exceptions. Bathhouses existed especially in towns like London or York. Public spaces where for a fee you could soak in warm water and chat awkwardly with strangers. But by the mid-16th century, those bathhouses were in decline, largely due to their reputation as, shall we say, less than chaste. The link between bathhouses and brothels became so entrenched that many were shut down, because nothing ruins soap's reputation like scandal. And even when bathhouses were running, cleanliness wasn't guaranteed. Water was reused. Towels were shared. The walls sweated with mildew. You didn't so much get clean as rotate your layer of filth. And with syphilis on the rise, people began to associate warm water with immorality and disease. So how did people cope with the lack of actual bathing layers? Lots and lots of layers. Linen shirts were worn under woolen garments, and they absorbed sweat oils and the sins of daily labor. Instead of washing the body, people washed their linen. Or at least they tried. But laundry was its own battlefield, and we'll get there soon. For now, your once-a-month bath leaves your skin red from scrubbing your joints, aching from crouching over a basin, and your pride slightly diminished. But at least you don't smell like old cheese for the next few days. Just damp cheese. Of course, the real question is, did people mind the smell? Not really. When everyone smells like a compost bin in July, no one stands out. In fact, strong perfume was often seen as suspicious. If you smelled too good, people assumed you were hiding something like disease or a crime. And that's not even a joke. Some folks thought criminals wore perfume to disguise their scent from bloodhounds. There were odd outliers. Some physicians encouraged light bathing with herbs for medicinal purposes. Others recommended wiping the body with a damp cloth and vinegar to balance the humors. One medical text suggested bathing in wine. Sounds luxurious until you remember wine back then was often sour gritty and probably filled with sediment. The strangest detail, some nobles believed goose fat applied to the skin would keep them warm and seal in health. Imagine being slathered in fat, wrapped in furs, and trying to pass that off as medical wisdom. Historians still argue whether this was common or more of an eccentric fad, but either way, it was greasy. So tonight, as you sit by the fire, your skin still stinging from the ash soap, and your bathwater cooling in the corner, you feel refreshed. Sort of. Clean by Elizabethan standards. You won't wash again until the next full moon, but for now, you've fought the good fight against body odor. Tomorrow, you'll cover yourself in perfume, re-wear the same clothes, and pretend this never happened. And if someone nearby starts sniffing, just blame the neighbor's pigs. You wake the next morning and stretch carefully the mild ache of yesterday's bath, reminding you that full body cleanliness is a dangerous sport in this era. But if you're lucky or rich, you might not need to go through the trouble again anytime soon. That's because nestled in certain corners of Elizabethan cities, there still exist relics of a now fading world, the public bathhouse. Of course, don't picture steam rooms and eucalyptus-scented towels. These bathhouses are communal tepid and smell more like wet dogs and stewed cabbage than relaxation. You walk past one now, a squat timber building, with moss on the roof and smoke wafting from its chimney. The sign swinging overhead shows a wooden tub and a wilted fern. Very inspiring. Inside the room is dimly lit by smoky lanterns. The air is thick with steam sweat, and the faint but inescapable tang of body odor that refuses to die. You can't really call it soothing. It's more like atmospheric soup. Wooden tubs line the walls, and some have water that's generously speaking warm. Others are lukewarm at best because heating all that water takes time, and firewood is expensive. Most bathers are already in the etiquette. Here is simple undress squeeze in, and try not to think too hard about how many people have already shared that tub today. There's very little privacy. A low wall here, a curtain there. But for the most part, it's open viewing. You might be shoulder to shoulder with a fishmonger, a shoemaker, and someone with a rash you're trying not to look directly at. You can't bring your modesty, but you can bring your own soap if you have it. Otherwise, you make do with cloth water and hope. The idea of a bathhouse isn't new, medieval, and Roman cultures embraced them before. But by the time Elizabeth is on the throne, these places are growing less popular, their reputations tarnished by whispers and outright scandals. Bathhouses are no longer just places to wash. They're places of social mischief. People start calling them stews, a nickname that carries both culinary and moral implications. Because it's not just dirt being scrubbed off here. Affairs gossip and the occasional illicit rendezvous are part of the steamy package. The church takes notice and disapproves. Public bathing, they claim, tempts the flesh, both literally and spiritually. Religious reformers call for closures. Add to that the rise of syphilis, called the French disease, because blaming other countries is timeless, and you've got a hygiene PR disaster. Bathhouses become synonymous with vice. One by one, they close or shift toward more private services, which is a polite way of saying they become brothels with buckets. Still, for a while, they serve a purpose. Not everyone can afford to heat water at home. Not everyone has a tub. So the bathhouse is your chance, however brief, to emerge cleaner than usual. Some even offer special services, herbal steams, scraped scalps, or shared delousing sessions. It's like a spa. If your spa was run by exhausted fishwives with strong opinions and stronger arms. And there are rules. Unwritten, but firm. Don't hog the hot water. Don't stare. Don't bring livestock. Don't dunk your head unless you want lice from 7 counties. Some bathhouses even assign attendants to scrub your back or pour water over your shoulders. If you're lucky, they're helpful. If you're not, they're chatty. Either way, you leave a few coins behind and exit 10 pounds lighter in dignity. For the upper classes, bathhouses are more scandal than necessity. If a noble is spotted, their rumors fly. That's why many opt for private bathing closets at home, small rooms with a copper tub, perfume towels, and a servant whose only job is to not laugh while pouring buckets. These spaces offer discretion and a carefully maintained illusion that nobles don't sweat like commoners. But even among the elite, the bath itself is not an everyday thing. Queen Elizabeth was famous for saying she bathed once a month, whether she needed it or not. This was considered disciplined. Cleanliness came through layers of linen perfume gloves and aromatic pomanders, lavender-stuffed orbs hung from belts or worn around the neck. In fact, the perfume industry thrives precisely because so few people bathe. Scent is a shield, a smokescreen, and a social signal all in one. Meanwhile, in towns like London, where the Thames doubles as a sewer, the need for bathhouses is ever present, even if they're fading. You can still find a few older buildings run by families who remember the glory days when bathhouses were civic institutions, not whispers of sin. They try to keep the tubs clean, the air fresh, and the customers semi-respectable. But it's an uphill battle against both social perception and the sheer logistical nightmare of heating water in bulk. Historians still argue about just how common bathhouse use was among various classes. Some believe they were frequented by a wide swath of the population. Others suggest they were mostly used by artisans and travelers. What's clear is this: the bathhouse was both a refuge and a risk. A chance to be clean, and a chance to leave with more than you arrived with, including fleas rumors or a nasty rash. So you walk past the bathhouse today, listening to the faint splashing within. You consider going in. But then you remember the last time the cold tub, the mysterious toe floating in someone's corner, the man who wouldn't stop talking about cheese prices while vigorously scrubbing his elbows. Maybe next week, maybe never. Instead, you scratch at the edge of your collar and decide that smelling slightly better than the neighbor is good enough for now. In Elizabethan England, cleanliness might be next to godliness, but it's also expensive, risky, and deeply communal. You pass through the narrow alleyway behind your tenement, careful not to slip on the mix of yesterday's rain and something suspiciously organic. The air is heavy, with the scent of tallow candles, roasting onions, and unwashed humanity. But beneath it all floats something unexpected: sweetness. Not clean sweet, but cloying, musky, aggressively floral. This dear wanderer is the Elizabethan solution to hygiene perfume. Perfume wasn't just a luxury, it was a survival tactic, a layer of olfactory armor between your nose and the world. People didn't necessarily smell clean in the Elizabethan era they smelled. Interesting. Think layers of lavender rosewater, clove oil, and just a hint of desperation. Because while soap and water were rare, a little bottle of perfume or scented vinegar could buy you social breathing room. You carry a pomander, a small perforated orb tucked in your sleeve, or belt filled with dried herbs, spices, or bits of ambergris if you're fancy. They're sold at markets, or prepared at home using household staples: rosemary, sage dried, orange peel, and vinegar soaked sponges. Some folks wear them on chains around their necks, dangling like miniature incense burners, warding off stench and sickness. And yes, part of the obsession with scent is fear-based. The miasma theory still reigns. People believe disease is carried on foul-smelling air. If you breathe in rot, you risk infection. So to survive a plague-ridden street, you inhale deeply from your scented pomander, basically an Elizabethan air filter for the terrified elite. The poorer folks, they improvise: cloths soaked in vinegar or rose water, bundles of herbs stuffed into hats, even dried flowers pinned inside collars. It's less about elegance and more about damage control. But the effect is the same, masking, not cleansing. You still haven't bathed. You just smell like someone who fell into a spice rack. Queen Elizabeth herself was reportedly fond of rosewater and jasmine oils. Her court reeked of luxury perfumes, clove-stuffed gloves, and scented fans fluttering through thick, stagnant air. Courtiers would dab scent behind their ears and their gloves, even on letters and handkerchiefs, everything but their actual bodies. It sounds indulgent, but remember, this was practical. You were constantly surrounded by people. Crowded rooms, public feasts, narrow streets. There was no 6-foot personal bubble. Everyone breathed each other's business, and if yours was too bold, you'd be remembered for the wrong reasons. So you douse your linen underlayer with a homemade blend vinegar rosemary and the dried petals you stole from the neighbor's garden. It stings the nose, but it's sharp enough to cut through the fog of 3 unwashed days. You smell less like yourself and more like a mildly flammable forest, which honestly is an improvement. Let's pause on this. The lengths people went to avoid actual cleaning. Instead of soap, you might use powders, ground herbs, or starches rubbed onto the skin or into clothing to absorb oils and odors. Afterward, you'd brush them off, taking the worst of the grime with them. Dry shampoo, 16th century edition. Some even powdered their wigs or hair with scented starches. These weren't gentle mists of lavender essence. They were chalky clouds of talc-like dust, sometimes pink, sometimes bluish, and often mixed with orris root, which smells like violets, but clings to the lungs like soot. Historians still debate how effective these powders were at reducing actual smell versus just distracting from it with novelty. Then there's the truly dedicated, those who bottled their own scents distilled over smoky fires using copper alembics and questionable recipes. One manuscript recommends distilling marjoram roses, cloves, and camphor into water of virtue. Another suggests rubbing your armpits with lemon peel to achieve the scent of a summer orchard, though you suspect the orchard was already rotting. Weirdest of all, some folks believed carrying certain stones like amber coral or even bezoars could ward off stench. They weren't fragrant, but they were mystical, and that counted for something. One noble allegedly paid a fortune for a bezoar stone to wear in his hat, claiming it could both purify air and repel bad dreams. The dreams, maybe. The stench, less likely. Perfume in this era wasn't regulated either. Ingredients ranged from delightful to dangerous. Civet, a musky oil extracted from the glands of a wild cat, was popular, though harvesting it involved some deeply unpleasant squeezing. Then there's ambergris, a waxy substance from the intestines of sperm whales. It smells oddly sweet and was used in everything from perfumes to baked goods. Romantic rite. And not everything smelled like flowers. Some perfumes were heavy with resins and tar-like notes. Others leaned toward the spicy, featuring cinnamon pepper and musk. Wearing scent was a statement of identity, a form of social signaling, and for many, the only hygiene they could afford. But it wasn't always about masks. There was a strange sort of intimacy to it, too. Lovers exchanged scented gloves or handkerchiefs. Letters were perfumed not just to impress, but to linger long after the words faded, the scent remained. A waft of clove oil on a breeze could be more alluring than a poem, assuming the poem wasn't soaked in vinegar like yours often were. By now, your perfume is fading. The rosemary's wilted, the vinegar's biting, and your cloak has absorbed the scent of the fishmonger's stall. But you're holding the line, just barely. You pass a neighbor who gives a polite nod, no flinch, no gag. Success. You smell like someone who tried. And in Elizabethan England, that's enough to earn a seat at the table. Of course, none of this replaces real hygiene. You still haven't bathed in 2 weeks. Your clothes are crusty at the seams, and your feet stuffed into leather shoes haven't seen daylight since last market day. But thanks to a few drops of lavender oil and a whole lot of social delusion, you're officially clean enough. And that, dear listener, is how perfume became the most powerful soap substitute in an age that feared water and worshipped scent. It wasn't about cleanliness. It was about plausible deniability. And you smell absolutely questionable, but just good enough to get by. You shuffle back inside the hem of your cloak, dragging through puddles that smell like yesterday's eel stew. You peel off your outer layer and toss it onto the stool by the hearth, where it lands with a solid, musty thud. Your tunic underneath is stiff, less from starch and more from the accumulated efforts of time sweat and last week's spilled gravy. It's laundry day. Or at least laundry ambition day. In Elizabethan England, the horror of laundry wasn't just about filth. It was about the absolute ordeal of trying to do anything about it. Clothes, even for the average person, were valuable. Most people owned only a few garments, worn repeatedly, rarely washed. Linen underlayers, shifts, shirts, smocks were the closest thing to personal hygiene. They were worn directly against the skin and absorbed the worst of your body's declarations. These were the items you tried to clean semi-regularly. Everything else, you brushed it down, spritzed it with vinegar, and hoped your neighbor's outfit smelled worse. Doing laundry in this era was a test of physical endurance, social willpower, and emotional resilience. First, you gather your items, mostly undergarments, and maybe a kerchief or two stiff, with what you hope is just dirt. Next, you need water. That means hauling it from a well, river, or communal cistern. It's cold. It's heavy. It splashes into your bucket like it's mocking you. Once you have water, the real work begins. Boiling. Heating water takes forever, especially if you're using peat or scrap wood from the market. Then you need soap. If you're lucky, you have some lye soap from the Chandler Hard and Yellow and Rough as a brick. If not, you improvise with ashes, old grease, and prayers to Saint Clare, patron saint of clean miracles. You scrub the garments against a washboard if you have one. Otherwise, it's flat stones or just your knuckles. You beat them against rocks or the side of a barrel, twisting and wringing them until your hands blister. The smell is overpowering wet linen, sour sweat, animal tallow, and soap that smells like despair. And don't even think about bleach. The closest thing is stale urine. Yes, actual urine. Ammonia-rich and collected in pots, then left to sit for days until it reaches peak potency. It's called chamber lye, and it was used to whiten linen. Historians still argue just how widely it was used, but evidence from urban laundry guilds shows it was definitely a thing. If your neighbor was storing suspiciously yellow jugs by her back door, she was probably in the middle of a deluxe whitening treatment. Some communities had public washhouses where women gathered to scrub, slap, and swap gossip while elbow deep in gray water. It was social, yes, but also cutthroat. Imagine trying to keep your shift from drifting into someone else's tub while 3 other women loudly judge your stitching and your life choices. For the upper classes, laundry was outsourced. You didn't do your own. You had servants or laundresses, usually lower-born women with sturdy arms and a tolerance for tedium. But even noble households might only wash linens every few weeks. Outer garments, those velvet doublets, brocade gowns, were never submerged. They were brushed, aired, and perfumed. Washing would ruin them. And many of them were lined with fur. You don't wash fur. You hope the smell of cloves is enough to stop conversation short. And what about drying? You hang your damp linen outside over hedges, across bushes, or from long lines. But if it rains, you're done. Wet fabric grows musty quickly, and mildew is a beast not easily banished. Plus, drying in winter is nearly impossible, so you end up draping shirts around the hearth where they steam gently like dish rags in a sauna. Your entire house smells like boiled laundry and scorched sheep fat. But you do it anyway. Because clean linen was a marker of respectability. A well-pressed smock told the world you weren't completely losing the battle with existence. Even Queen Elizabeth, who likely bathed infrequently, reportedly insisted on fresh linens every day. Servants changed her sheets, wiped her with vinegar-soaked cloths, and ensured her image of white crisp purity was never sullied by a rogue mustard stain. And there were status rules, too. Bleached linen was a sign of wealth. White clothing showed you could afford both the fabric and the maintenance. The poor often wore off-white grayish linen, not because it was stylish, but because they couldn't spare the soap or the sun-bleaching time. The real horror, though, was winter. Washing clothes in the cold meant plunging your hands into icy water, scrubbing until your fingers were numb and red. You'd beat the clothes dry and drape them wherever you could, even laying them on your own bed for lack of space. Some households just skipped washing in winter altogether, opting to freeze the filth into submission until spring returned. And the tools, buckets, barrels, wooden paddles, and elbows. No wringer, no spin cycle, no delicate setting. It was muscle work, and it ruined garments quickly. The constant twisting and pounding wore holes in seams, frayed edges, and turned linen to lace long before its time. Even so, people got creative. They used starch to stiffen collars and cuffs made from flour, and water boiled into a paste and brushed onto fabric before drying. The result? Rigid, shiny pieces that could stand up on their own. A properly starched ruff could double as a frisbee or a neck brace. Elizabethans loved their fashion, even if it smelled faintly of vinegar and cooked wheat. You finish wringing out your shirt and hang it above the fire where it drips slowly onto your boots. Your arms ache, your hands sting, and your house smells like laundry stew. But you're done for now. Cleanish, proudish, and your linen shirt. It's almost dry. Almost. So next time someone tells you the Elizabethans didn't value cleanliness, remember this: they did. They just had to fight for every inch of it. With boiling pots, sloshing urine, blistered fingers, and a whole lot of stubborn pride. And if your smock smells faintly of both lavender and regret, that just means you're doing it right. You lean over the basin to check your reflection in the water. A warped, murky version of your face stares back, eyes dull, with fatigue, and a faint crust of something unidentifiable clinging to your jawline. You splash some cold water on your cheeks and grimace. It doesn't help much. You reach instead for the little stone pot next to the hearth. Inside, the secret weapon of Elizabethan multi-use horror urine. Yes, it's true. In an era with no germ theory, no Clorox, and certainly no CVS beauty aisle urine was the medieval multi-tool of choice. It was used to bleach linen, soften leather, treat wounds, clean wounds, dye wool, and hold on to your underpants' whitened teeth. Don't gag. This was chemistry Elizabethan style. The reason was ammonia. Urine, after sitting out a few days, breaks down into ammonia, a powerful cleaning agent. Think of it as nature's original Febreze only. Well, the opposite of fresh. People would collect chamber lye, a delicate euphemism for stale pee, in clay pots and store them by the back door. Some families even had scheduled collection routines. It was valuable stuff. Barrels of the liquid were sold to tanners, dyers, and yes, laundresses. Historians still debate whether its use in personal hygiene was widespread or more fringe, but even contemporary manuals hint at its cleansing properties. You dip a cloth in a small bowl of diluted chamber lye and wipe your hands. It smells faintly like fermented sadness and wood smoke, but your fingertips do feel oddly smooth afterward. Is it the cleansing power of ammonia or the sheer trauma response of your skin cells? No one knows. But it works. Kind of. Now about your mouth. Yes, people actually used urine as a mouthwash. Before you flee the scene, understand that dental hygiene in this era was experimental at best, with little access to anything remotely sterilized and no concept of microbes. Folks tried whatever they thought might work. And if your uncle's uncle said swishing a bit of stale urine would whiten your teeth, you did it, because teeth were falling out faster than hope. To be fair, they didn't just jump straight to pee. Some would mix vinegar with powdered pumice or burnt rosemary ash. Others rubbed teeth with crushed oyster shells or chalk. But the ammonia in urine had genuine chemical properties. If you got over the smell and the taste, you might just emerge with brighter teeth, at least until the enamel wore off completely. And that wasn't its only domestic role. Urine was a staple in the wool industry. Dyers used it to set colors, soften fibers, and clean raw wool. It was often mixed with woad, a pungent blue dye derived from plants, to create rich indigo shades. Picture a field full of workers stomping barefoot in vats of wool and urine, singing bawdy ballads and trying not to breathe too deeply. That's industry Tudor style. Even leatherworking wasn't safe. Tanners soaked hides in urine to loosen hair and soften the skin. Then came the scraping, the stretching, and finally, the drying. The stench was legendary. Whole neighborhoods in London were avoided because of the overwhelming aroma from tanneries. You didn't just live next to one, you endured it. Some barbers and surgeons even used it as antiseptic. Before surgery, or what passed for surgery, a cloth soaked in urine might be applied to cleanse the area. Again, not because they understood bacteria, but because they noticed that wounds cleaned with urine sometimes festered less. Scholars still argue whether this was coincidence or chemistry, likely a little of both. And if you were a particularly bold apothecary, you might even prescribe it. Fresh child's urine was considered especially pure, used in concoctions for eye infections and skin ailments. There are even records of it being used to treat scurvy and fevers. The logic, something something bodily balance. Honestly, you're just glad your doctor isn't handing you a cup with a wink and a spoon. The class divide played into it too. The poor reused their own urine. The rich, if they used it at all, had servants collect it, because why handle your own fluids when you can outsource your grossness? A noblewoman wouldn't be caught dead, scrubbing her cuffs with urine, but her laundry maid. Absolutely. Just don't talk about it during supper. And here's where things get extra weird. Urine was also part of love magic. Yes, love. Some spellbooks of the time describe potions made from a person's urine used to attract or bind another's affection. Spells to bring back wayward husbands, charm a disinterested suitor, or curse a rival often involved a urine-soaked rag, some herbs, and a dash of moonlight. It's romantic in the least appetizing way possible. Back in your cottage, you've finished wiping down your boots with chamber lye. They shine a little more. You hope the scent fades before church. Your shirt recently soaked in a diluted mix is a touch whiter, though that may just be from your eyes watering. You look around the room at the pot resting near the hearth and marvel at how one bodily byproduct became the Swiss Army knife of the 16th century. Is it weird? Absolutely. Does it make sense in context? Also, yes. When you don't have bleach detergent, antiseptics, or toothpaste, you work with what you've got. And what Elizabethans had plentifully was pee. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't fragrant. But it was available free and vaguely effective. So next time you complain about doing laundry or brushing your teeth, remember, at least you're not boiling your own fluids for freshness. And if you are, well, you may have been born in the wrong century, or perhaps the right one, depending on how you look at it. You wipe your face with a scrap of linen, pat it dry with the least crusty corner, and glance at your reflection again, because in Elizabethan England, skincare is less about beauty and more about tactical survival. But if you're a lady of the court, or even just someone with social ambitions and a mirror, your next move might be to paint your face with poison. Yes, welcome to the glamorous world of Elizabethan cosmetics, where lead and arsenic are your best friends and your worst enemies. You open your little wooden box of powders and creams, tiny pots of white paste rouge and darkened wax, and get to work. Because pale skin isn't just fashionable, it's moral, noble, and pure. And to achieve it, you'll need to layer on the deadly charm. Let's start with Venetian Cirrus, the holy grail of Elizabethan beauty. A thick white paste made of vinegar and white lead. It's applied all over the face, neck, and sometimes hands. It dries chalky smooth and alarmingly opaque. The result? A flawless porcelain mask that slowly eats through your skin like a stylish acid bath. Historians still debate whether Elizabeth herself used Cirrus regularly or had her own blend, but surviving recipes suggest widespread use among noblewomen. Once your face is a uniform shade of ghostly death, it's time for rouge made from cinnabar mercury, sulfide, cochineal, crushed insects, or madder root. The look is all about contrast, bone-white cheeks, and blood-red splotches. There's nothing subtle here. You're painting confidence onto your face and hoping it doesn't flake off during conversation. To darken your eyebrows and lashes, you might use soot-powdered antimony or burnt cork. Apply carefully with a tiny brush or finger. Too much, and you look like you've survived a chimney accident. Not enough, and you fade into the candlelight. And let's not even talk about eyeliner, unless you fancy rubbing crushed lead near your eyeballs. Lips a subtle tint from crushed berries or red clay. Or if you're wealthy and brave a dab of mercury-based pigment. Nothing says kiss me like heavy metal. Now, why the obsession with whiteness? It wasn't about race, it was about class. Pale skin meant you didn't work in the sun. It meant you were rich, idle, and untouched by manual labor. Tanned skin meant you tilled fields, dug ditches, or just existed outdoors too long. So women and some men chased ghostliness with a religious fervor. Of course, not everyone used the same poisons. Poorer folk used flour chalk dust or even clay. These didn't smooth out scars or pockmarks as well as lead paste, but they also didn't kill you as quickly. Trade-offs. And here's the wild part: these substances worked at least visually. Ceruse gave you that smooth, radiant glow in candlelight. Mercury flushed your cheeks. Antimony gave your eyes a dark, dramatic allure. But over time, your skin blistered, peeled, and became discolored. Users developed tremors, nausea, and eventually rotten flesh. Still, they layered it on again and again, because beauty, like cleanliness, was a public performance. Let's not skip the ritual. Makeup wasn't casually applied. It was a process. Hours spent in front of polished mirrors, attendants helping to grind pigments, mix pastes, and carefully apply each layer with rabbit hair brushes or fingers. It was both meditative and meticulous. You didn't just get ready, you transformed. Men weren't immune either. Courtiers powdered their faces, curled their mustaches with wax, and darkened their beards with burnt clove paste. They wore scented gloves, doused their hair with rose water, and even applied cheek tint for that extra vigorous glow. The line between rugged and radiant was blurrier than you'd think. And if you got tired of painting your face daily, enter the face patch. Little bits of velvet or silk cut into moons, stars, or hearts glued over blemishes. They were meant to hide smallpox scars, pimples, or shaving nicks, but they quickly became fashion statements. A patch near the eye was flirtatious. Near the lips, bold. On the forehead, mysterious. Think of it as Elizabethan emoji code. You finish your look with a spritz of rose water or ambergris perfume. The scent cuts through the metallic tang of the ceruse, though your face feels stiff and slightly itchy. That's normal. You hope. You give yourself one last look in the mirror and smile. Your teeth are questionable, but your skin looks flawless. As long as no one touches your face or questions why it's peeling. Some courtiers went even further. They had their faces professionally painted, their wigs powdered and scented with lavender starch, their hands rubbed with almond oil and scraped clean of calluses. They wanted to appear otherworldly, effortless, and untouchable. But underneath the layers, the same blotchy skin toothaches and body odors lurked. Makeup was both camouflage and costume, and it often exacted a toll. Scholars still argue whether Elizabeth's iconic image, the high forehead, powdered face, and impossibly smooth complexion, was entirely real or part of her crafted political persona. Portraits were heavily idealized. Artists were instructed to paint, not the woman, but the idea of the queen. So while her subjects blistered in their homemade ceruse, Elizabeth may have been posing behind layers of symbolic whiteness, not just poison. Of course, some people went without. Rural women, widows, and those in mourning often shunned makeup altogether. It wasn't just fashion, it was a moral stance. Vanity was sinful, pride even more so. But in the bustling world of the court, to appear barefaced was social suicide. Better a little lead poisoning than being mistaken for someone who churns butter. So now, fully painted and perfumed, you step out into the London fog. Your cheeks glow, your lips pout, and your pores quietly scream. But heads turn, people nod. You've won the game for today. You're not just clean, you're beautifully dangerous. You take careful steps through the bustling street, mindful not to trip on the uneven stones, or worse, fall into one of the many open channels lining the path. They run along the edges of buildings, gurgling with a grim mix of rainwater animal droppings, food waste, and something that might once have been soup. Welcome to the Elizabethan gutter system, where personal hygiene ends and public hygiene tries and fails to pick up the slack. These channels are called kennels, and they are not for dogs. They're the de facto sewer system of the day, collecting everything that isn't good enough for indoors and sending it downhill to someone else's problem. You don't need a keen sense of smell to detect them. They announce themselves from half a block away with a bouquet of spoiled alefish guts and very old socks. Waste disposal is not a coordinated civic duty. It's a personal performance. People toss slop from windows, often with a shout of Gardez, a corruption of the French, regardez l'eau, or watch out for the water. The warning gives pedestrians just enough time to jump aside. Unless, of course, they're deep in conversation or unlucky. In which case, you're wearing your dinner and someone else's breakfast. Human waste too often finds its way to the street. Chamber pots are dumped into the kennel in the early morning or late at night. If you're higher up in a building, gravity is your accomplice. The poor might just do their business in a corner of the alley or in communal privies, wooden benches over pit latrines that rarely get cleaned until the smell threatens political rebellion. You pause at a crossroads where the stench is particularly aggressive. A dead rat floats gently down the stream, bumping into cabbage leaves and a soggy shoe. Children hop across the stones, lining the gutter, laughing, barely noticing the effluence they're dancing around. For them, this is normal, part of city life. Historians still argue whether the Elizabethans were simply nose-blind or actively cultivated selective oblivion, but either way, the results are aromatic. In some areas, the town employs rakers' men tasked with carting off waste, usually at night. Their job is to scoop up what's been left behind, shovel it into barrels, and haul it to the city's edge. They are not beloved. Their carts creak through the streets, dripping, leaving behind trails like sinister snails. But they're necessary. Without them, the filth would pile up until the rats form their own government. Speaking of rats, yes, they're everywhere. Fat ones, bold ones, the kind that look you in the eye when you enter a cellar. They thrive in the waste scamper through kitchens and spread disease. Fleas, too, and lice. You scratch your arm instinctively. It's not paranoia, it's just part of life. There's no centralized sewer system in London yet. Some wealthier homes have cesspit stone-lined holes where waste collects. These have to be emptied regularly by gong farmers, the most unfortunate profession in Tudor England. Gong farmers descend into the pits with shovels and buckets, dig through human waste, and haul it away, usually under cover of darkness. They're paid surprisingly well, mostly because no one else wants to do it. If a cesspit overflows, it leaks into the street, your cellar, or your neighbor's well. Disease spreads. Water gets contaminated. People start praying harder. And the local priest suggests it's punishment for sin. You, of course, just want a bucket of clean water and maybe a very long stick. Public health as we know it doesn't exist yet. There are no city sanitation departments, no waste management schedules. Instead, hygiene is patchwork. Some areas post signs banning the dumping of waste. Others fine residents for allowing filth to build up outside their homes. But enforcement is sporadic, and bribery is easier than compliance. Bathhouses, which once offered some relief, are shutting down or converting into more questionable establishments. The River Thames is the city's dumping ground. Everything flows there eventually, including the hopes of clean living. The strange thing, despite the chaos, Elizabethans were aware of cleanliness. They tried. They swept streets on holy days. They burned herbs during plagues. They scattered sand on floors to soak up mess and added rushes for fresh scent, though those rushes often hid the opposite of freshness. One writer described pulling back floor rushes and finding rotten food-old socks and enough vermin to start a nature documentary. If you were very lucky, your home had a privy, an outhouse at the edge of the garden, or a wooden seat over a barrel. These were emptied when someone complained loudly enough. But more often, the daily solution was a bucket, a window, and good aim. You step carefully as a woman ahead of you leans out from an upper window pot in hand. You freeze. She glances left, glances right, and dumps. A stream of brown arcs into the street with a splash. Close call. You nod politely, and she disappears inside. Hygiene in this world is a shared experience. So you keep walking cloak, lifted slightly boots, crusted at the edges. You try not to breathe too deeply. You avoid the worst puddles, and you mutter a silent thanks for whichever saint is in charge of boot preservation. Probably Saint Crispin. He's got your back. This is urban cleanliness in Elizabethan England. A constant battle against filth with vinegar cloth and a whole lot of denial. And every step is a reminder that in this era, hygiene means dodging the worst of it and surviving long enough to tell the tale. You close the door behind you with a satisfying thunk, grateful to be off the streets and away from the open sewers masquerading as gutters. Inside, your humble home is dim and smoky, lit only by a dying fire, and the weak light filtering through your oiled parchment window. But here's the problem. Inside isn't much cleaner than outside. Dust clings to every surface. It's not the fine, invisible kind. You might imagine it's chunky, gritty, and made of who knows what. Bits of wool fluff soot, ash-crushed herbs, insect droppings, and the perpetual shedding of your linen. Housekeeping in Elizabethan times isn't a matter of spring cleaning. It's a daily war, waged with brooms, rags, vinegar, and silent weeping. You grab your sweeping brush, a stiff bundle of twigs tied together with string. No long handle, no ergonomic grip. You stoop low and start brushing, working the dirt and crumbs into a pile. There's no dustpan. You'll scoop it by hand or onto a scrap of wood if you're feeling fancy. But don't hope for clean floors. Just less disgusting ones. Now let's talk about the rushes. These are not rushes in the poetic sense, but literal dried plants, long grasses or reeds spread across the floor to absorb mess and add insulation. In theory, they're changed regularly. In practice, not so much. Queen Elizabeth's courtiers might get fresh rushes every few weeks. You, however, are walking on a compressed mat of mystery mulch that's been down for months, years even. The rushes smell faintly of hay lavender and old secrets, But underneath lies a horror story. Food scraps, bones spilled ale, the occasional fish head, and so many dead insects, it's practically an ecosystem. One 16th century visitor described lifting a layer of rushes and finding moldy bread animal droppings and the desiccated remains of a toad. So yes, sweeping around them is really just theater. If you're trying to impress a guest, you scatter herbs, rosemary, thyme, lavender on the floor. It smells lovely, distracts from the mold, and possibly repels fleas. But if you step too hard, you also release a puff of every horrible thing trapped beneath. It's like shaking a rug filled with medieval secrets. You finish brushing and turn to your table, a sturdy wooden slab that doubles as a prep station, eating surface, and occasional surgical platform. It's sticky. Not from syrup or anything sweet, just living. You grab a damp cloth, soaked in vinegar, and give it a wipe. The cloth is stiff. The vinegar burns your eyes, and the grime clings like it's afraid to be alone. You scrape gently with a knife. Progress is slow. Cleaning agents in this era are natural but brutal. Vinegar is your go-to disinfectant. So is lye, if you can get it. But it's caustic and burns your skin if you use too much. Ashes are another option, rubbed onto greasy pans to cut through the fat. Soap exists, but again it's expensive, harsh, and smells like scorched goat. Most homes make do with sand and elbow grease. For dishes, you scrape off food with a knife, rinse in cold water, and wipe with cloth. That's it. No sponge, no detergent, no rinse cycle. Plates are often made of wood, which absorbs flavor and bacteria. Some use pewter, which is prettier, but full of lead. You try not to think about that as you eat. Pests are a given. Fleas hop through the rushes. Lice lurk in linens, and flies buzz constantly, especially near anything edible. You wave them off with a cloth or light a bit of sage in the corner and hope the smoke convinces them to leave. It rarely does. The ceiling is streaked with soot from years of candle smoke and open fires. Cobwebs lace the beams too high to reach unless you stand on a stool and risk a fall. You sigh and let them be. Maybe they'll catch a few more flies. Spider webs as pest control, nature's oldest cleaning staff. And then there's the bed. Or more accurately, the mattress, a sack stuffed with straw or feathers laid on ropes tied across a wooden frame. The ropes sag. You tighten them regularly, hence the phrase sleep tight. But no matter how tight you pull, the mattress always manages to feel lumpier the next day. You fluff it, shake out the worst of the debris, and avoid looking too closely at the stains. Some are yours. Some are older than you. Linen sheets. Yes, if you're lucky. You wash them monthly, maybe. And only if it's warm enough to dry them properly. Otherwise, you just air them out and hope time works its magic. Blankets are wool, heavy and scratchy. They smell of lanolin smoke and memories. You light a candle and try to improve the scent of the room. If you're wealthy, you might burn incense, frankincense, myrrh, or something vaguely lemony. If not, you stick with herbs, or maybe toss orange peels into the hearth. One particularly strange trick involves placing a slice of onion in each corner of the room to absorb ill vapors. Does it work? Historians still argue about that, but at least it makes the place smell like something cooked. Every so often, you open a window. Not for fresh air, it rarely helps, but to let out the worst of the smoke. The breeze carries in more dust, but you've accepted that by now. You're not fighting for perfection, just less bad. By the end of the day, your arms are sore, your knees are damp, and the floor still looks like a barnyard's less hygienic cousin. But you've done it. You've cleaned in the most medieval sense of the word, which is to say, things are now slightly less likely to kill you. And tomorrow, you'll do it all again. Because Elizabethan housekeeping isn't about winning. It's about not losing too badly. About keeping one step ahead of the mold, the rats, and the quiet shame of sticky spoons. You're kneeling by the hearth now, elbow deep in soot, as you stir the ashes to coax a fresh flame from yesterday's embers. The fire is your lifeline to warmth, to food, and yes, to something resembling sanitation. It boils your water, scorches your pots, dries your laundry, and drives off the worst of the damp. But it also fills your home with smoke coats, your lungs with tar, and leaves your hair smelling like roasted wool. Still, you need it. So you feed it scraps of peat twigs, and if you're lucky, a log or two. The smoke curls upward, darkening the beams, and slowly adding another layer to the ceiling's ever-growing crust of black grime. You cough, wave your hand, and carry on. Because without fire, everything stops. Including the closest thing to a bath you've got left, the steam pot. You place a large kettle of water over the flames. Into it, you toss rosemary, thyme, a handful of mint if you're feeling luxurious. This is your vapor bath, not an actual soak, but a cloud of scented steam rising up to greet your pores. You lean over it, cloth over your head, breathing in deeply. Your skin sweats. Your eyes sting. But when you stand up, flushed and damp, you feel just a little cleaner. And that counts. Elizabethans didn't invent steam cleaning, but they certainly embraced it when a real bath was out of reach. In some cases, it was even considered medicinal. Sweating houses existed in cities, crude saunas, where sick folk were wrapped in blankets and left to perspire beside a fire. The goal to purge the bad humors and sweat out disease. Historians still argue whether this was based on genuine belief or sheer desperation, but the logic tracked in an era where everything was about balance. Of course, heat wasn't just for humans. You also used it to fumigate your clothing. You hang your smock near the fire, not close enough to scorch it, but enough to bake out the moisture, and with luck a few fleas. Sometimes you even press a hot iron against seams and collars. It doesn't kill all the lice, but it slows them down. Temporarily. Lice are a constant companion. They burrow into your seams, your cuffs, your bed linen. You scratch absent-mindedly behind your ear, where you're certain a colony has established a voting council. You comb through your hair with a fine-toothed bone comb, wincing with every tug. Fleas jump ship occasionally, tiny acrobats fleeing your scalp to nest in your hat instead. To deal with them, you try what you've heard from your neighbor: hang a strip of greasy cloth under your shirt. The fleas, drawn to the warmth and smell, climb onto the strip. At night, you remove it and burn it. A weirdly effective trick, and strangely satisfying. Like a tiny personal revenge against something evolutionarily invincible. You keep a bowl of water with herbs near the hearth. Some say it freshens the air. Others say it lures the bad spirits from your home. You just know it smells better than your shoes, which are currently steaming by the fire, releasing a bouquet of mildew leather and crushed garlic. Because, yes, you've lined your boots with garlic skins. Not for scent, but to repel evil. And maybe foot rot. Who can say superstition runs deep here, and the line between hygiene and warding off demons is blurrier than your sooty window pane? You light a dried bundle of mugwort and wave it near your bed, hoping to banish bad dreams. Whether it works or not, at least it chases away the flies. By now, the steam from your kettle is fading, So you dump what's left into a bucket for laundry or mopping, or both. You don't waste water, not after hauling it from the well, boiling it for half an hour, and watching it vanish into vapor while it mocked you. For those with money, hearth maintenance is a job for the scullery maid or kitchen boy. But you're everything: cook cleaner, fumigator, and accidental chemist. Your hands are red from scrubbing your eyes, itchy from smoke, and your clothes, well, they're technically dry. That's something. Some folks experiment with sweet waters, homemade herbal infusions, used for cleaning surfaces or more ambitiously skin. Recipes vary: rose petals, bay leaves, cinnamon cloves. The result smells delightful, but lasts about 5 minutes. Still, in a world where decay is faster than fashion, 5 minutes of nice is a victory. You rub your arms with a cloth dipped in the cooled infusion. It doesn't quite clean you, but it leaves you fragrant, and that's nearly as good. You run your fingers through your hair, sticky tangled, and lightly singed at the ends, and hope you pass as presentable, or at least not actively oozing. Your fire crackles, giving off the only warmth in the house. Outside fog curls down the lane, wrapping the village in a cold, damp silence. You pull your cloak tighter and sit by the hearth feet propped on the worn stool, steam rising from your boots and your forehead. You're not clean, not in the modern sense, but your shirt is less stiff, your hair no longer greasy enough to fry an egg, and the fleas seem momentarily confused. That's a win. So you smile faintly, stretch your aching arms, and settle in for the evening. The hearth flickers. The room stinks slightly less than it did this morning. You, brave soul, have earned your place beside the fire, one soot-marked, steam-cleaned, garlic-footed moment at a time. You wake in the dead of night, heart pounding, and immediately become aware of two things. Your blanket has slipped halfway off, and something is definitely crawling under your shirt. You resist the urge to slap wildly too risky. Instead, you sit up slowly and begin the familiar nighttime ritual, the great scratch and swat. Because here in Elizabethan England, bedtime isn't restful. It's survival. Let's talk beds. You lie on a tick mattress, a canvas sack stuffed with straw feathers, or in the worst-case scenario, dried leaves. Over time, these compress into uneven lumps and create mysterious rustling sounds when you shift your weight. You try not to imagine what's inside. You just hope whatever it is stays asleep longer than you do. The bed frame is rope-laced wood. You tighten it every few weeks to keep it from sagging into a hammock of despair. But the real challenge isn't the mattress, it's what lives in it. Bed bugs, fleas, lice, the occasional mouse. These uninvited roommates nestle in warm folds of fabric, lay eggs in seams, and consider your flesh a buffet. You scratch again, this time behind your knee. That one's definitely a flea. You can almost feel it mocking you. You shift to the edge of the bed and examine your linen shirt by candlelight. Tiny black dots scurry along the hem. You sigh. Another infestation. Flea control in this era is a never-ending war. You hang greasy strips of cloth around the bedposts, hoping to trap the insects. Some people sprinkle herbs like pennyroyal or rue under the mattress natural repellents. Others keep their bedding near the hearth all day to roast the critters out. You've done all three, and still here they are itchy, invisible, invincible. And then there's the lice. Body lice live in the seams of your clothing and feast at night. Head lice make their homes in your scalp, building little colonies of horror. You own a lice comb, a fine-toothed tool made from bone or metal and every few days you spend an hour dragging it through your hair, praying for mercy. Historians still debate whether everyone had lice all the time, or if it came and went in waves. But one thing's for sure, if you're not itchy, you're either very lucky or very delusional. The wealthy don't have it much better. Their feather beds are softer, their linens finer, but the bugs don't discriminate. One account from a noblewoman complains of her mattress being lively with the night's mischief. Even Queen Elizabeth had her bedding aired daily, sometimes multiple times, and her attendants were tasked with delousing her clothing regularly. Some tried to outwit the bugs with bed tents, canopies hung with netting, or thick curtains meant to trap warmth and repel pests. Unfortunately, they also trapped the bugs in with you. Smart in theory, itchy in execution. If you're married, you share this nocturnal nightmare with your spouse. If you're poor, you might share it with your children, or siblings, or parents. Whole families in one bed, all scratching in unison, like some deranged percussive ensemble. Add to this the cold. Most homes don't have fireplaces in the bedrooms. You rely on body heat blankets and thick socks, and maybe a bed warmer, a metal pan filled with coals slid between the sheets before bed. It's comforting until it scorches a hole in your linen or sets the straw ticking smoldering. Fire hazards and hygiene, such a cozy pairing. Oh, and let's not forget the midnight bathroom situation. You have a chamber pot tucked under the bed. If you wake with a full bladder, you use it gingerly, trying not to spill. It's dark. Your hands are cold. The pot is ceramic and unforgiving. You don't dare open a window, who knows what's watching. You replace the lid, slide it back, and hope it doesn't tip over before morning. For the really unlucky bed bugs aren't just an annoyance, they're a plague. Entire households can be overrun. People burn their bedding scrub down the walls, sprinkle ash and sand around the bedposts, and still the bugs return. One desperate remedy involves wrapping the bed legs in sheep fat to trap crawling insects. Another recommends sleeping with a knife under the pillow. Not for bugs, for evil spirits. But frankly, you're more worried about the former. So you sit now, in the quiet, the candle flickering as you comb your sleeves, whispering curses at creatures too small to see. This is the unseen war of hygiene, not the grand, perfumed efforts of daytime. This is the itchy-twitchy, half-conscious fight that never really ends. You lay back down slowly, carefully. Your linen shirt is now outside the covers, forming a barrier between you and the mattress. Your toes curl instinctively as something brushes your ankle. Is it straw? A loose thread? Or the start of round 2? You close your eyes. Try to drift off. Tell yourself that sleep is possible. That tomorrow you'll hang the sheets out. Sweep the rushes again. Maybe sprinkle more lavender and salt. You'll heat a comb in the fire and run it through your collar seams. You'll try. You always try. And maybe, just maybe tonight, you'll get 3 hours of uninterrupted sleep before the scratching starts again. The sun peeks through your parchment-covered window with all the subtlety of a judgmental in-law. It's morning, which means it's time for the most cautiously optimistic part of your Elizabethan hygiene routine, the communal bath, or what's left of it. You throw on your least wrinkled smock and make your way toward the bathhouse. If you're in London, or any sizable town, chances are there's at least one public bath still hanging on, though by the late 1500s, they're starting to fall out of favor. Blame the Reformation. And syphilis. Mostly syphilis. Bathhouses were once a staple of urban life. Steam rooms, tubs, massage tables. herbal treatments, you name it. Think Roman-style relaxation, but with less marble and more mildew. At their peak, they were places to get clean, socialized conduct business, and maybe, depending on the establishment, arrange for services not listed on the menu. But over time, the church grew suspicious. Too much skin, too much pleasure, and far too much opportunity for temptation. Add in the terrifying new arrival of syphilis in the late 15th century, and suddenly bathhouses are less relaxing cleanse and more hotbed of moral and literal infection. Historians still debate whether these bathhouses were truly dens of sin or just the Elizabethan version of a co-ed gym. But by your time, many have closed or been rebranded as stew houses, coded language for brothels. You steer clear of those. You're here to actually get clean. Maybe. The bathhouse you visit is run by an old widow named Mistress Perrin. She's sharp-tongued, smells faintly of chamomile, and insists on prepayment. You hand over your coin, more than you can afford, and she gestures you toward the back room. It's warm, steamy, and dimly lit. A wooden tub waits in the corner, already used once this morning. You don't get fresh water. You get warmed over. Still, it beats freezing in a wash basin. You peel off your layers and step in. The water is murky with floating herbal debris, a few stray hairs, and something suspiciously green. But it's warm. That's the main thing. You lower yourself, slowly sighing as the heat soaks into your sore limbs. For a moment, you forget the lice, the soot, the stiff collars. You are just a human in water. Soap, if available, is homemade, lye-based, and gritty. You rub it between your hands and try not to notice the roughness. It smells like old candles and pine tar. You scrub your arms, your legs, your neck. Your fingernails still look dubious, but at least you've loosened a week's worth of grime. You dip your hair massage in water and hope. No shampoo, of course. Just the faint hope that water and time can do what potions can't. Across the room, someone else is finishing their turn. They dress quietly, nod in your direction, and leave. This is not a place for chatter. Bathhouses are half holy, half taboo. You do your business and go. Mistress Perrin knocks once when your time is nearly up. You climb out dripping and wrap yourself in a scratchy linen towel. The air is cold now. You dress quickly, wincing as your damp skin sticks to the inner seams. But you feel lighter, flushed, steam cleaned, like a boiled vegetable with ambitions. Outside, the air hits you like a wall. Cold, damp, and filled with smoke from the neighboring baker's chimney. You breathe in, smell roasted rye and wet wool, and smile. For a few glorious hours, you're the cleanest person in your street. But bathing this way is rare. Most Elizabethans didn't visit bathhouses often, once a month, maybe if that. Full-body washing was viewed with suspicion. Many believed hot water opened the pores and let disease in. Some thought bathing weakened the body. Others just hated being naked in public. Understandable. Instead, people cleaned piecemeal. A basin for hands and face, a cloth for armpits, foot baths, hair combing, clothing changes when available. The emphasis was on visible tidiness, not sterile purity. You might not be clean under your smock, but if your collar's crisp and your hands don't smell like fish, you're winning. Back home, you hang your damp garments near the hearth. You boil a pot of water for tea, or at least water warm enough to not feel like betrayal, and sit by the fire. Your skin tingles. Your scalp itches a little less. And the dog avoids sniffing your socks for once. You run your fingers through your drying hair. It smells faintly herbal, part rosemary, part smoke. You wonder if the cleanliness will last until tomorrow. Probably not. But for now, you are victorious. You survived the Elizabethan bathhouse. You paid your coin, dodged the disease, and lived to rinse another day. And if you feel a little smug about it, that's fine. Hygiene here is an achievement, not an expectation. The warmth of your rare bath is already fading as you step back into the open air. London streets greet you with their usual aromatic cocktail horse droppings, rotting fish, damp wool, and a general musk that makes you wonder if the city itself is slightly undead. You pull your cloak tighter, tucking your clean-smelling shirt away, like a secret you can't afford to share. You pass a butcher's stall, just as someone dumps a bucket of blood-soaked water into the gutter. It flows toward the nearest drain, or would if that drain wasn't already blocked by a lump of mystery meat and a tangle of straw. You sidestep it with the grace of someone who's practiced this dance their entire life. Because this is not unusual. This is Elizabethan London, a city of 10,000 smells and zero plans for waste management. The streets are filthy. Some are paved with cobblestones, others with gravel or just beaten dirt. None are particularly clean. You dodge a cart splashing through a puddle of suspicious origin and nearly trip over a dead goose someone left behind like a dropped glove. It's half picked over, probably by dogs or people. You don't want to know. Even the air tastes dirty. Soot from thousands of chimney fires floats on every breeze. It coats your lips, your lungs, the back of your throat. You cough, not delicately, but the deep, rattling kind that suggests you've spent a week inside a fireplace. Which, in a way, you have. That's not all the air carries. The smell of tanning leather soaked in urine and dog dung drifts from the edge of the city. Add that to the miasma of the Thames choked with every conceivable type of waste. Animal guts, brewery runoff, human excrement, everything flows to the river. It's both lifeblood and latrine, and people still drink from it. You stop at a street vendor offering ale thick, sour, and safer than water. Everyone drinks ale, even children. Not to get tipsy, but because it's boiled during brewing, and therefore less likely to kill you. Historians still argue how aware Elizabethans were of waterborne disease, but the preference for ale over water suggests instinct or experience or both. You sip, grimace, and move on. The city is full of smells layered like a tragic cake. Horse dung is everywhere. Horses are everywhere. Their droppings are rarely cleaned quickly. They mix with mud and turn into a gritty paste that covers everything below ankle height. Your boots squelch with each step. You make a note to rinse them later maybe, with that last scoop of your steam kettle water if the fleas haven't claimed it. The meat markets don't help. Butchers work in open stalls, hacking through carcasses with alarming enthusiasm. Blood runs in little rivulets down the cobblestones. Guts are flung aside. Bones pile up until someone carts them away, or rats do it for free. Tallow chandlers boil fat for candles just a few stalls down, filling the air with the rich, cloying scent of warm grease. It's nauseating and oddly mouthwatering at the same time, like smelling someone else's stew while nauseous. Then there's the human component. People don't exactly smell like roses. Most folks wash sporadically. They cover odor with herbs oils or just layers of cloth. In summer, the stench becomes aggressive. In winter, it's trapped under wool and fur fermenting like forgotten soup. Perfume helps. Nobles dab themselves with rosewater ambergris or vinegar-soaked sponges. You once tried a pomander, a small scented ball worn around the neck or on the belt. It worked until it absorbed too much of the outside world and became a scent sponge of suffering. And yes, even royalty smelled. Elizabeth I was famous for her cleanliness, changing her linen daily, having her face wiped with alcohol and rosewater. But the people around her, not always as fastidious. The court stank beneath its velvet and pearls. Every banquet, every dance, every prayer session was a bouquet of human effort and limited soap. You reach the edge of the square where someone's selling sweetmeats and roasted chestnuts. The scent is warm and oddly comforting. You buy a handful of chestnuts, not because you're hungry, but to cover the more aggressive odors. You hold them near your face like a Victorian-smelling salts kit. It helps. A little. City officials occasionally try to fight the stench. They post proclamations banning waste dumping. They hire rakers to clean the streets. They urge citizens to clean their gutters. But follow-through is rare, and enforcement is laughable. Bribery is easier than fines. The filth builds again, always. Sometimes the smell gets so bad, it's said to cause illness. The miasma theory rules the medical world bad smells are believed to carry disease. So, people carry posies of herbs, wear masks stuffed with lavender, or hold oranges pierced with cloves under their noses. A walking citrus army of denial. You pass a physician's apprentice on the corner selling packets of plague repellent, a mix of crushed herbs and ground chalk. You've bought it before. It does nothing, but it smells better than most of your neighbors. And finally, you reach home again. You stand in the doorway, chestnuts cooling in your hand, and take one last whiff of the London air. It hits you like a tapestry of everything terrible smoke, sewage, roasting meat, old cheese, and desperation. You step inside, close the door, and breathe in the oddly comforting scent of your hearth, your rushes, your barely boiled shirt. Because here at least you know what stinks. And in a world like this, that's something like peace. You hang your cloak by the door, grateful to be out of London's olfactory obstacle course. Inside your home smells like smoke-damp wool and a hint of something herbal. Not bad, not great, but it's manageable thanks in part to the odd little globe you carry on your belt, the pomander. It dangles from a chain, swinging gently as you move. You unclip it and hold it in your palm. A small perforated orb, often made of silver or brass filled with aromatic treasures. Cloves, cinnamon rose, petals nutmeg, maybe even a hint of ambergris if you're feeling wealthy or mysterious. It's your portable defense against the miasma of everyday life. A medieval air freshener with a side of superstition. Pomanders are status symbols as much as they are practical tools. The finer the metalwork, the wealthier the owner. Some are simple wooden balls filled with herbs. Others are miniature masterpieces, hinged, engraved, divided into sections for different scents. A personal perfume pantry on a chain. You open yours and inspect the contents. The clove is a little dry. The orange peel is holding up, but the rosemary needs replacing. You make a mental note to visit the apothecary, or if funds are tight, the neighbor's herb patch under cover of darkness. Pomanders aren't just for pleasure, they're for protection. In the Elizabethan mind, scent is health. The air is filled with invisible dangers. Bad air is believed to cause everything from plague to melancholy. Good smells are a shield. If you smell sweet, you must be safe. So people wear pomanders, burn herbs, hang scented sachets near windows, and even stuff flowers in their noses during processions. Some folks go further. The nobility might wear gloves, soaked in scented vinegar. They hold them up to their faces whenever the street stink gets aggressive. Others dab their temples with rose oil or sprinkle lavender into their wigs. You once saw a woman with a literal garland of thyme around her neck. She looked ridiculous, but unbothered by the fishmonger's cart, so maybe she had a point. You return your pomander to your belt and sit near the hearth. The room is filled with the scent of singed bread and faint rosemary. You take a moment to prepare something called Four Thieves vinegar, a legendary blend of herbs and strong vinegar said to ward off the plague. You're not sure it works, but it makes your hands smell less like pickled socks. The story behind it is charmingly grim. Four criminals robbing the dead during a plague outbreak supposedly avoided infection by soaking their clothes and hands in this potion. Historians still debate whether it was ever used or simply became a tale to sell overpriced vinegar. Either way, it's stuck, and now it's part of your home hygiene arsenal. The average Elizabethan house didn't have many options when it came to deodorizing. You could hang herbs above your hearth, scatter crushed mint on the floor, or boil vinegar in a pan to purify the air. Some families hung dried oranges studded with cloves in doorways, not just festive, but functional. You tried that once. It looked lovely until the neighborhood cat knocked it down and ran off with it. Windows didn't help much. Most were kept closed to keep out the cold, the damp, and the neighbors. So scent control became an indoor sport. People stuffed herbs in cushions, lined trunks with rose petals, and even dabbed vinegar on their door frames. Anything to mask the truth of what was living or dying in the corners. Perfume was popular too, though not always pleasant. Some were rich and floral, others musky and strange. One noble's signature scent involved civet, a glandular secretion from a wild cat. It was prized for its longevity, though wearing it meant you smelled like someone had startled a ferret. You own a single bottle of scented oil, a gift from your cousin, who once worked in a bishop's kitchen. It smells like rose water, with a sharp note of something you can't place. You dab a bit on your wrists, and hope it blends well with the lingering notes of soap smoke and whatever the dog rolled in last week. Scent wasn't just practical, it was performative. Courtiers doused themselves in perfume not only to mask their own funk, but to out-fragrance their rivals. It was political. The better you smelled, the more power you signaled. A noblewoman might carry a tiny flask of scented vinegar and touch it to her lips before speaking symbolic sensual and slightly acidic. Even doctors played the scent game. Plague doctors stuffed their bird-like masks with herbs, mint, camphor, marjoram, not for flair, but to protect themselves from what they believed were poison-laced airs. You once saw one walking through town, a silhouette of mystery, stench, and superstition, flanked by clouds of rosemary smoke. And the superstitions ran deep. A bad smell in your home might mean illness, or worse, a curse. To counteract it, people burned bay leaves, rubbed garlic on door frames, or hung iron bells above windows. One woman swore by burying a dead mouse in her garden to ward off air demons. You don't ask questions anymore. If it smells bad and stays buried, it's a win. Back by the fire, you adjust your pomander again, letting its cinnamon clove aroma rise into the room. You feel cleaner, not in the modern antiseptic sense, but in the Elizabethan way, less offensive, more fragrant, better prepared to face the unrelenting stank of the outside world. Because in this age, cleanliness is a scent. It's rosemary in your sleeves, orange oil behind your ears, a vinegar-spritzed collar, and a little metal orb swinging from your belt, whispering to the world that you are at least trying. You hold your pomander a little tighter as you pass the polished mirror, hanging in your tiny front room, more polished metal than glass, but good enough to catch your own reflection. And there it is, the pale face, the darkened lashes, and beneath it all, the slowly dying skin cells surrendering to your makeup routine. Because here's the truth. No one likes to admit your signature look is killing you. And that's not hyperbole. Let's talk about the most iconic beauty standard of your time, the milk white face. Porcelain flawless, not a blemish in sight. In Elizabethan society, pale skin is not just fashionable, it's essential. It screams nobility. It whispers, "I've never worked in a field nor broken a sweat." It suggests a life of leisure books and philosophical sighs near latticed windows. But achieving it, that's where things get well murderous. You sit down at your dressing table and reopen your cosmetic kit. First, the base Venetian ceruse made from white lead mixed with vinegar. You apply it with a rabbit hair brush or fingers smoothing it across your face in even layers. It stings slightly normal. The coverage is unbeatable. It hides pock marks, age spots, and the general tiredness of someone who's lived through an outbreak or two. The problem? It's slowly poisoning you. Lead is a neurotoxin. Prolonged exposure causes headaches, muscle tremors, and eventually death. You've read pamphlets that blame the Queen's increasingly distant demeanor on lead-induced brain fog. Historians still debate how aware Elizabeth was of the substance's effects. Some say she relied on it to mask the scars of childhood smallpox. Others argue it was part of her myth-making, a deliberate visual barrier between monarch and mortal. Next, the rouge. It adds that healthy blush to your otherwise ghostly complexion. Popular recipes include mercury sulfide, another delightful heavy metal. You swirl a little onto your cheeks. You're not even surprised when it causes itching flaking and mysterious sores over time. It's the price of being visible. You reach for your lip stain, maybe a berry tint today. Less toxic, though prone to fading unless reapplied constantly. Some women darken their lips with red lead, but you draw the line somewhere. Besides, your teeth aren't white enough to pull off a bold lip. Which reminds you, you've got to brush those soon with your crushed rock and honey paste. That, or rub them with burnt rosemary and a clean cloth. So many choices. So few actually helpful. There's a knock at the door, your friend Anne. She enters, pulls back her hood, and sighs dramatically. Her face is even paler than yours, with hints of purple around the eyes. "Ceruse, again, you ask?" She nods, rolls her eyes, and mutters something about it making her look less like a potato. You both laugh, because this is the shared understanding of Elizabethan womanhood. Beauty hurts. Not metaphorically, literally, and yet you do it anyway. Even men aren't immune. Courtiers whiten their faces, add subtle rouge, and scent their beards. They wax their mustaches and apply powdered starch to their ruffs. The powdered look is universal. It separates you from the unwashed masses, even though, ironically, you're all wearing the same underlying filth. Your mirror reveals a faint crack in your makeup, just below the jawline. You reach for your tiny pot of filler, a mix of wax and ceruse, and press it into place. This sort of maintenance takes hours. It's not unusual for women of rank to sit through multi-stage application sessions while attendants grind pigments and blend pastes by candlelight. You've also tried the skin peels made of egg whites, alum, and sometimes vinegar. They're meant to tighten your skin and lift away blemishes. Instead, they leave you red-faced and tender for a day. But if it means fewer visible pores, so be it. The worst part: the makeup doesn't age well. It cracks, it flakes, If you sweat, it streaks. If you smile too hard, it crumbles. So you practice stillness. A serene, composed, expressionless beauty. It's not just a look, it's a lifestyle. Removal is a nightmare. You use warm wine or milk rubbed with linen. Then follow with rose water or vinegar to cleanse. But the lead never truly comes off. It sinks in. It builds up. And over time, it claims its territory. Skin becomes gray, then yellowed. Hair thins. Gums rot. You've seen it in older women. The waxen pallor, the hollow cheeks, the brittle eyebrows. They look like statues mourning themselves. Still you persist. The social cost of going barefaced is higher than the physical cost of poisoning. No one says it aloud, but a woman without makeup might as well walk through the market naked. It's shocking, indecent, suggests illness, mourning, or madness. You remember the one time you skipped your face paint for a quick errand. A child asked if you were a ghost. You lean forward and paint a final layer of ceruse over your temples. Smooth, cold, perfect, for now. Anne hands you a sprig of rosemary. You tuck it into your bodice, not for scent this time, but for luck. She lights a taper and passes it near your wig stand. The heat helps set the starch in your coif. The flame flickers against the glass of the mirror, and for a moment you wonder what your skin looked like before all this. Softer, maybe. Less numb. You shake the thought away. You're beautiful now. Deadly beautiful. And in this world, that's the best kind. You're standing outside the apothecary's door, the carved sign of a mortar and pestle creaking slightly in the wind. You hesitate. You're not sick exactly, but there's a spot on your arm that won't stop itching, and your neighbor swears it's a humor imbalance. Or maybe devil pox. Depends on which way the wind is blowing and how many leeches she's seen this week. So in you go into a world of jars, vials, dried herbs, and oddly threatening smells. The air is thick with rosemary and camphor, and something vaguely resembling old pickles. The apothecary himself, a wiry man with ink-stained fingers and a suspicious twitch, greets you with a half bow and gestures to the shelf of remedies. You start browsing. Licorice root, crushed oyster shell, ground unicorn horn, definitely just powdered deer antler, but no one dares say it aloud. You ask about your rash. He peers at it with mild interest, mutters something about overheated blood, and prepares a poultice made of goose grease and mashed marigold. You pay in coin, and goodwill tuck the bundle into your pouch and leave. You'll try it. You've tried worse. Last month's cure involved rubbing a split onion across your chest while reciting the Lord's Prayer backwards. That didn't go well. The trouble is, you don't trust doctors. Not the proper ones. Not the ones with degrees from Oxford, or the ones who travel with satchels full of rusted implements. Because the truth is, hygiene isn't a strong point in Elizabethan medicine. You've seen it with your own eyes. The town barber doubles as surgeon. He cuts hair pulls teeth and lances boils often, using the same knife rinsed in ale or wiped on his apron. His tools sit in a leather roll, stained and unidentifiable. When he sterilizes them, it means he waved them briefly through a candle flame. If you're lucky, you recall visiting him once for a nasty splinter. He removed it by biting it free, with his teeth. You left with the wound and a story, and spent a week praying you wouldn't grow a second arm. Hospitals, you don't go to them unless you're already halfway dead. They're overcrowded, underfunded, and rarely cleaned. The concept of sterilization simply doesn't exist. Linens are reused floors, go unwashed, and blood is just part of the decor. There are no gloves, no soap, No masks unless plague season is underway, in which case doctors wear their infamous beaked masks, stuffed with herbs to filter the poisoned air. Historians still argue whether those masks were actually used widely or just became symbolic after the fact. Either way, they make a strong impression. You once saw one at a distance during a summer fever outbreak. The long nose, the wide hat, the black cloak, it looked more like a bird come to collect souls than a physician. People avoided him like death itself. There are healers you trust, more midwives, wise women, herb wives. They use clean cloths, boil water, burn herbs, and at least pretend to care about what touches your skin. One midwife taught you how to wash wounds with wine and cover them with cobwebs, the good kind from barn corners, not fireplace soot. Surprisingly, it worked. Probably the alcohol, or the placebo, or maybe the cobwebs have secret powers. You're not questioning it. Doctors, on the other hand, treat cleanliness as optional. They focus on humors, the balance of blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. Your rash, too much heat in the blood. Your headache, wind in the brain. Your stomach ache, melancholy, obviously. The cure is usually the same bloodletting. You've seen it done. A small cut with a lancet, then a bowl to collect the bad blood, or a leech if the physician wants to be fancy. You once heard a man nearly faint as a doctor filled 3 bowls before declaring him rebalanced. He died 2 days later. But for those 2 days, his humors were pristine. Even the nobility aren't spared. Queen Elizabeth herself had physicians who recommended concoctions of crushed pearls and mercury. She took them. She got worse. But no one dared suggest otherwise. When royalty declines, everyone blames the stars. You sit by your hearth that evening, poultice in hand, thinking back on all the strange medical practices you've seen. A woman with toothache who was told to kiss a donkey. A man with jaundice fed nothing but boiled carrots for a week. A child with fever doused in vinegar and wrapped in onions. All of it part tradition, part trial, part desperation. And yet, amid the madness, some things work. You know to wash a wound with wine. You know to change your linens after an illness. You know that the cleanest homes get sick less often. The link between hygiene and health is there lurking, even if it hasn't been named yet. So you apply your marigold and goose fat mixture, wrap it with a strip of clean cloth, and hope for the best. You're no doctor, but you know enough to boil your rags, burn the old straw, and keep the rats out of the flour bin. And in a world where physicians shrug at pus and reuse their leech jars that might just be the edge you need, morning again. The fire's out. Your breath is visible, and something under the floorboards has been gnawing all night. You shift the rushes with your foot and hope it's just a rat and not the start of another infestation. Either way, you have more pressing matters laundry. You brace yourself. Laundry in the Elizabethan world isn't just a chore, it's an ordeal. You begin by gathering your linens, shirts, shifts, caps, aprons. Woolen garments are spot cleaned, only never fully washed, lest they shrink or warp. Linen, though, takes the brunt of your daily filth. Sweat body oils, smoke food stains, lice. You don't need a microscope to know it's alive. Down by the stream, or in your case, the public washing area, you find others already at work. Women stand knee-deep in icy water, sleeves rolled, hair tied back. There's chatter, yes, but it's mostly practical. Who's using what soap? Who has lice again? Who's bleeding through her bodice and blaming it on angry spirits? You set your bundle down and reach for your lye soap. It's homemade ashes, water animal fat. Harsh, gritty, and deeply unfriendly to skin. But it works. You dunk your linens, wring them out, scrub them across a wooden board or against rocks. The water turns gray, then brown, then something you stop describing altogether. Your hands go numb. The soap burns. But you keep scrubbing because wearing unwashed linen is a social crime even if you've just spent 2 days delousing your bodice. Elizabethans might not bathe daily, but they do change their linen, frequently. A clean shirt is a badge of respectability. It absorbs your sweat and filth and keeps your outer layers presentable, which means it gets filthy fast, especially in summer. Especially if you own only two. Wealthier households send their laundry out servants or hired washerwomen who collect it in large bundles, take it to the river, and return it eventually cleaner and stiffer than before. Some even scent it with lavender or bay leaves pressed between folds. You've tried that once. The lavender made your cousin sneeze for an hour. Stains are tackled individually. Wine use, salt and cold water. Blood, more salt, and maybe a prayer. Grease, a mix of ashes and stale urine. Yes, urine. Known as chamber lye, it's collected fermented and used as a powerful stain remover. You wrinkle your nose just thinking about it, but it's effective. You've dabbed it on a sleeve, more than once, pretending not to notice the smell. Once scrubbed, rinsed, and wrung out, your linens need drying. You spread them on bushes, hedges, or lay them across clean grass. If you're lucky and the sun's out, they'll dry by nightfall. If not, you'll be draping them around your hearth for days, rotating constantly to avoid mold. Ironing of a sort follows. You own a box iron hollow metal filled with hot coals. You wrap your hand in a thick cloth and press it along the seams of your shirt, hoping not to scorch it. Steam hisses. Fabric sizzles. You wince and continue. A properly starched ruff takes even more work, boiled starch, careful shaping hours of drying under tension. Fashion is exhausting. And there's no reward but survival. Clean linen means fewer lice, fewer rashes, fewer judgments from your neighbors. It means you can walk into church without everyone shifting away from you on the pew. It means your itchy spots stay manageable, not scandalous. But laundry also has its dangers. Women sometimes fall ill from working too long in cold water. Washerwomen's hands are raw, cracked, permanently damp. There are even superstitions. Some say washing linen during a waxing moon will cause spirits to cling to the cloth. Others warn that washing during Holy Week invites bad luck. You've never tested those theories, but you always eye your drying line with mild suspicion just in case. Once your wash is finally done and draped across your garden fence, you sit back and admire the slightly less brown linen fluttering in the breeze. You're tired, damp, and smell faintly of ashes and soap, but there's a sense of satisfaction here. You've beaten back entropy for another few days. Laundry in this world is not just about hygiene. It's identity, status, defense. It's how you tell the world, I may not bathe daily. I may share my bed with fleas. I may live in a house with more rodents than roof tiles. But by God, my smock is clean. And really, isn't that what dignity is? You stare at your laundry line with the weary pride of someone who just survived a brawl with nature and lie. The linens flap gently clean enough to pass not clean enough to eat off, though considering the state of Elizabethan table manners, that might be a very low bar. But don't get too comfortable. Clean clothes are only part of the battle. Let's talk about your hair. Yes, that nest. You duck back inside, warm your fingers near the hearth, and begin the delicate ritual known as trying to manage your scalp without starting a small fire. Hair hygiene in this era isn't about volume, and shine. It's about survival styling and sheer defiance in the face of lice. For starters, you don't wash your hair often, maybe once a month if that. Full hair washing with water is risky. There's a belief it can make you sick, especially if your head stays damp. So instead, you cleanse it with dry methods. You dust your scalp with powder, sometimes crushed herbs, sometimes flour and brush vigorously to lift out oils and dirt. You reach for your comb, a sturdy thing carved from bone. It has teeth so close together, it's basically a torture device. You part your hair and begin the slow, careful comb through. Not for style, for lice. Because they're back. They never really left. You find one then another. You crush them between your nails with the grim focus of someone who's accepted their role as apex predator in a very small ecosystem. The egg's nits cling to your strands like glue. You pull them off one by one, flicking them into the fire with a strangely satisfying pop. You think about wigs. Nobles wear them curled, powdered, impressive. But they're not exactly clean either. Wigs are rarely washed. Instead, they're scented powdered and combed out by servants who pretend not to notice the colonies setting up shop beneath the curls. You own a wiglet, a partial piece for festive occasions. It smells like rosemary and resignation. Your natural hair, meanwhile, is long. Most women keep it braided or pinned under a coif. You oil it with rosemary or rose-infused grease, part to scent it, part to keep it from breaking. Split ends are not a concept. Your whole head is one big split end, really. Still, you do what you can. Hair color is fashionable, too. Blonde is in. You've heard of women using saffron rhubarb or even pigeon droppings to lighten their locks. Brunettes rub walnut oil into their strands. Redheads just exist. Suspiciously. Some say red hair marks you as a witch or a child of the fae. You once tried a rinse of lemon and sun to lighten your hair. It mostly just made you smell like a salad. For the truly desperate, there are wigs made from other people's hair. Imported, expensive, sometimes stolen off corpses. You try not to think about that too much when Lady Marbury tosses her curls and claims natural bounce. Sure, John. Men have their own struggles. Hair is longer, often tied back. Beards are fashionable, styled with wax and oiled to shine. Some even dye their beards to match their hair or to look more distinguished. You once saw a merchant with a beard the color of a ripe carrot. Bold choice. Possibly accidental, but hygiene questionable. One man's beard is another man's lunch. Crumbs, soot, pipe ash, it's all in there. You once kissed a fellow who tasted like week old mutton. You did not repeat the mistake. Barbers do their part. They cut hair trim beards and sometimes even apply scented oils. If you're feeling fancy, you might get a scalp massage with lavender or camphor. But no one's washing your hair. That's on you. You finish combing your scalp slightly red, but your spirit's lifted. You dust off your coif, white linen vaguely cone-shaped, and secure it over your head. Hair hidden, scalp stable, lice temporarily defeated. You glance toward the hearth, where your old comb sits heating by the flames. Hot combing is your next defense. You carefully test the warmth, then run it through your hair again. The heat kills eggs, fries, lingering bugs, and makes your head smell like burnt straw. But it works. There's something almost meditative about this process. The brushing, the oiling, the quiet war against insects. You think of your grandmother, who used vinegar and ashes to wash her hair once a season. She wore it in a braid so thick it could probably knock out a sheep. She swore by nettle tea and boiled rosemary for growth. You use both, now tradition and desperation, go hand in hand. Outside, your neighbors are hauling out their own laundry, checking for lice or burning old bedding. There's no shame in it. Everyone fights the same battles. Even the queen in her silken glory has her wigs deloused by candlelight. You add a sprig of mint oil behind your ears and smile faintly. You're not clean by modern standards, but your scalp doesn't itch. Your coif sits flat. Your comb has done its grim job. And for tonight at least, your head is your own. Evening settles over the town with that familiar sour scent of chimney smoke, overcooked turnips, and wet wool. You pull your cloak tighter, your newly deloused coif hidden beneath the hood, and head toward the parish hall. Tonight is one of the rare public health lectures. Well, technically, it's a moral sermon, but health gets smuggled in between the Bible verses and fire and brimstone warnings about idle hands. You find a spot on a worn bench beside a neighbor who smells faintly of lavender and pigpen. The vicar, a red-faced man with eyebrows like small hedgehogs, climbs the pulpit and begins speaking about cleanliness. Not just the bodily kind, but the spiritual kind. For cleanliness is next to godliness, he declares. You try not to roll your eyes. That phrase, while deeply popular, won't appear in its recognizable form for another century, but the idea, it's everywhere. Cleanliness is a moral virtue. Filth is sin's companion. A tidy home reflects a tidy soul. A clean shirt is proof of divine favor. And any woman who smells like fish and ash might as well tattoo witch on her forehead. Elizabethan society has folded hygiene into its social code. The church preaches about it. Households enforce it. Children are taught to scrub their faces, wear fresh collars, and change their underlinens on feast days. Not because of germs they don't know about those yet, but because dirt is disorder, and disorder invites the devil. There's a popular belief that bad smells attract bad spirits. Miasma, the invisible bad air, floats through neighborhoods and carries disease like gossip. You've seen people run in panic when a foul wind blows through. You've seen homes fumigated with burning rosemary not to kill bacteria because that word doesn't exist, but to chase out the invisible demons hiding in the rafters. And yet the logic often tracks. The cleanest homes suffer less during outbreaks. The best aired clothes itch less. People don't know about bacteria, but they know that vinegar helps. That boiling water matters. That dried herbs near a doorway sometimes keep a baby alive through winter. You lean over to your neighbor and whisper, "At least he's not preaching about lice this time." She snorts and whispers back, "Wait till the leech lecture next week." You stifle a laugh. The vicar continues, "The body is a temple, and if the temple is filthy, what hope does the soul have? Harsh, perhaps, but common." Entire households are judged by the scent of their entryway. If your rushes stink of mold, if your chamber pot is overflowing, if your shirts are yellowed at the collar, you are morally suspect, maybe lazy, maybe godless. So people work hard to appear clean even when they're not. They air their laundry in public. They scatter flowers across their floors. They scrub their doorsteps with vinegar and water. Not always because they care about illness, but because they fear shame. It's not just spiritual pressure, it's legal too. Some towns have ordinances against foul smells. You can be fined for dumping waste too close to a neighbor's house. But enforcement is uneven. If you're poor, you pay. If you're wealthy, you pay someone to pay someone to look the other way. You think of the foul fines posted in your parish records. One man charged for butchering pigs too close to the well. A woman fined for storing fish in her back room. Another for letting her privy overflow onto the street during a rainstorm. You wonder what they smelled like. You wonder if anyone ever apologized. There's a brief break in the sermon as a dog runs into the parish hall. It shakes itself vigorously, splashing mud in a 6-foot radius. Everyone groans. Someone tries to shoo it away with a broom. You silently thank the dog for the intermission. When the vicar resumes, he shifts focus to personal conduct. Let your body reflect your reverence. Do not be as the pagans who stink of wine and oil. You think that's a slight at the French. Or maybe the Italians. It's hard to tell anymore. But it's clear hygiene isn't about science. It's about symbolism. Cleanliness proves virtue. Dirtiness breeds suspicion. A well-groomed woman is trustworthy. A man who trims his beard is disciplined. A home that smells like lavender and not lard is a home that respects God. You think about your own habits. The lavender sachet under your pillow. The vinegar you use to rinse your feet. The rosemary tucked behind your hearth bricks. Are these medical? Maybe. Spiritual? Probably. Superstitious? Definitely. But they're also armor. Rituals in a world where disease is invisible and death is common. By the end of the sermon, you feel oddly affirmed. Yes, you're itchy. Yes, your shirt is stiff with starch and a little damp at the collar. But your linens are aired, your hair is oiled, your hands are stained from laundry and not sin. You've done your part. The vicar offers a final prayer for health modesty and the continued success of town soap production. You murmur, Amen. Gather your things and step back into the night. The air is crisp, cool, and smells briefly of baked apples from someone's kitchen. You breathe deeply. Maybe he has a point. Maybe your soap-scrubbed hands are closer to heaven than you thought. The stars are out when you return home, scattered like tiny icy lanterns over a sky that smells vaguely of chimney soot and wet chickens. You light a stub of candle and begin your nightly rituals, the last defense against Elizabethan entropy. First, the rushes. You sweep the old ones toward the hearth, collecting crumbs, dust, and what might be the dried husk of a long-forgotten pea. These floor rushes, sedge or straw, sometimes mixed with herbs, aren't just decoration. They're your carpet, your air freshener, and your dirt trap. When fresh, they smell faintly of hay and lavender. When old, they smell like everything that's ever happened in the room, and not in a good way. You replace them with a fresh bundle interwoven with dried mint and rosemary. There's something oddly satisfying about the sound of the new rushes crunching under your feet, like walking across a summer field in a room made of wood and soot. You even scatter a few crushed bay leaves by the door just for show. They're said to ward off illness, but they mostly make you feel smug. Then it's on to your linens. You sniff your bedclothes acceptable. No fresh mildew. No unmistakable whiff of dog. You fluff your pillow, beat it against the wall a few times to discourage critters, and then pull your chamber pot from under the bed. Still half full from last night, you make a mental note to empty it before morning. Or not. It depends how much you care about dignity at sunrise. There's no such thing as over-cleanliness here. Not because people don't care, but because too much washing is considered suspicious, obsessive, possibly dangerous. You heard of a man who bathed twice in 1 week and caught pneumonia. He was buried before anyone figured out what had killed him, the disease or the cold air on damp skin. You take a cloth, your face rag, soaked in vinegar and lavender water, and begin wiping your hands, your neck, your ears. The smell is sharp, but not unpleasant. It makes your eyes water slightly. You use the same cloth on your feet, then hang it by the fire to dry. It crackles slightly from old soap residue. For your face, you dab on a bit of rose water, then dust it with rice powder. Just enough to absorb any lingering oil from the day. A clean face is a modest one. Glossy skin is for bawds and actors. You once made the mistake of skipping this step before visiting a cousin, and her nurse muttered unwashed ambition behind your back for a week. You rinse your mouth with wine diluted spice better than water. You swish spit into the hearth quietly and chew a fennel seed to freshen your breath. Toothpaste is a luxury. Your usual routine involves a cloth soot and the occasional crushed eggshell. Your gums bleed sometimes, but that's just life. You still have all your teeth. For now. As you sit by the fire brushing your hair with your bone comb, you reflect on how hygiene here isn't about what you feel. It's about what others see. You could be covered in fleas, but if your ruff is crisp and your shoes aren't muddy, you're a picture of virtue. Likewise, you might smell like a boiled turnip. But if your nails are clean and your cuffs are white, you're halfway to sainthood. You stare at your fingernails cleanish. You scrape them gently with a sliver of wood, rinse them in your vinegar bowl, and call it good. No one's checking your cuticles. Not unless you're being tried for witchcraft. And even then, they're more interested in your moles. You put out your candle and slide into bed, drawing your linen sheet and woolen blanket around your shoulders. The air is cold. You curl your feet into the warm spot left by your dog, who has wisely claimed the center of the bed. You consider moving her. You don't. You feel reasonably clean. You smell like lavender vinegar and old lye soap. Your hair is brushed. Your linens are fresh. Your floor no longer crunches underfoot. You've done your duty. And yet, even now, even with all this effort, you know that somewhere beneath the sheet, a flea is making its slow pilgrimage toward your ankle. You hear the faint rustle of something in the thatch above. You smell the smoke of the neighbor's fire seeping through the wall. It's not perfection, but it's hygiene Elizabethan style. Dawn slips in through the cracks in your shutters, slow and gray, and already smelling faintly of someone else's breakfast. You stretch under your scratchy wool blanket, scratch behind your ear, because yes, the flea found you after all, and start mentally preparing for another round of basic survival disguised as hygiene. First stop the privy. If you're lucky, it's outside and not currently being used by a family of hedgehogs. If you're unlucky, it's inside and last night's chamber pot is now this morning's regret. Either way, you brace yourself. Elizabethan toilets range from surprisingly organized brick outhouses to literal holes in the floor. Yours is somewhere in the middle, a wooden bench with a hole and a dark pit below. It smells like ammonia rot and time itself. You squat carefully, feet braced, skirt, hiked eyes squinted, because there might be a rat down there, and you're not interested in reenacting any tales of unexpected bites in sensitive places. You do your business quickly. There's no toilet paper, just moss rags, or, if you're feeling fancy, scrap cloths kept in a bucket and reused after washing. You grab a cleanish one and hope for the best. Privies were theoretically cleaned. Night soil, men would come scoop out the waste under cover of darkness, paid to haul it away and dump it in designated fields outside the city. But not always. Sometimes the pit fills. Sometimes the floor collapses. You once heard of a woman falling in during a storm. She survived. She never smiled again. Back inside, you rinse your hands in vinegar water, drying them on a cloth that hasn't been properly boiled in 3 weeks. You make a mental note to change that, or not. Your standard shift, depending on whether you've had breakfast. You prepare your morning wash, face, hands, and underarms. You heat a little water mix in lavender or mint and use your worn rag to scrub yourself. No soap today? You're out. You'll try to barter for more. Maybe trade those extra turnips you've been hiding under the hearth. And now, the real enemy, your underclothes. You remove yesterday's shirt and inspect the damage. Sweat stains, lye residue, maybe a little blood, hopefully yours. It needs a wash, but you only have 2 shirts. You slip into your cleaner one. It smells faintly of starch and desperation. Good enough. You layer on your outer garments, woolen petticoats, bodice, overskirt, and adjust your coif to hide your hairline where the lice sometimes regroup. Your neighbor once shaved her head entirely and wore a wig lined with herbs. It helped. It also made her look like a startled egg. There's a knock at the door. It's your friend, the one who always shows up with a basket of herbs and unsolicited hygiene advice. Today, it's sage. Chew this, she says. Cleans the teeth, freshens the breath, and keeps your soul from wandering. You take a bite. It tastes like lawn. You talk as you walk about new laundry techniques. The mysterious rash on the apothecary's son, whether soaking one's feet in salt water, actually helps with the winter madness. Historians still argue how much of this era's hygiene was driven by genuine health concern versus sheer ritualistic repetition. But for you, it's all the same. You do what your mother did, what your neighbor swears by what the preacher hints at, and hope it's enough. At the market, you trade for soap, thick, yellowish, sharp-smelling. The woman selling it claims it was boiled with bay leaves and goat tallow. You nod, though it smells more like beef and burned hopes. Still, it's better than nothing. You also pick up more herbs rosemary for your bed, thyme for your scalp, and a bit of camphor pricey. But it keeps the moths out of your linens and maybe wards off death. You return home to find your dog has vomited near the hearth. A half-eaten chicken foot stares at you in silent betrayal. You sigh, rinse your hands again, and sprinkle ashes over the mess. Cleaning isn't glamorous, but it's necessary. Hygiene in this time is less about sparkle and more about survival. And yet, oddly, you're proud. Your linens aren't spotless, but they're aired. Your hair isn't glossy, but it's combed. Your coif sits straight. Your rushes are fresh, and your chamber pot didn't overflow. In Elizabethan terms, you're crushing it. You take a moment to light your rosemary sprig. The scent curls into the air, masking the damp and the dog. You sit in your worn chair, feel the sun finally cutting through the window, and think you're still here. You've outlived lice outbreaks, soap shortages, suspicious smells, and that one neighbor who tried washing her baby with lamp oil. You've survived scalding water, freezing water, no water. You've resisted the lure of using your best linens when no one's visiting. You've even mastered the art of not flinching when someone sniffs too close at church. In this world, hygiene isn't just washing, it's warfare. And every morning you wake up itchless and smell vaguely herbal. That's a win. The light is softer now, slanting across your floor in long streaks of gold and soot. Your hands are raw from scrubbing. Your coif is slipping sideways, and your fire is down to a few glowing coals. The day is winding down, and so is your Elizabethan hygiene routine, a daily balancing act between visible decency and invisible threats. You blow gently into your cupped hands. They smell faintly of rosemary and the faint iron tang of hard water. Your nails are stained from ash and bay, but at least they're clean beneath mostly. You drag your stool closer to the hearth and begin folding your linens, the ones you worked so hard to wash and dry earlier. Each piece is a small victory, a stiff collar, a mostly white shift, a pair of stockings that no longer smell like last month's boots. These aren't just clothes. They're your armor, the boundary between you and the filth of the world outside. Because no matter how carefully you wash, how often you sweep, or scrape, or air out your bed straw, there's always more waiting, more fleas, more stains, more rumors about what happens if you don't rinse your feet before Whitsun. You hang your shift for tomorrow, near the fire just enough to warm it, not scorch it. You've done that before. Burned the edge of a perfectly good shirt because you left it too close to the flame while gossiping about the baker's fourth wife. That's the thing with Elizabethan cleanliness. It's a fragile, flammable illusion. But still, you persist. You prepare your vinegar cloth again, your final face wipe before bed. The scent is sharp eye-watering, oddly comforting. You dab your cheeks, your chin, your temples. A token gesture, perhaps, but it matters. It means you've tried, that you care, that you're not slipping into that vague middle ground between decency and suspicion. Because even now, even after a day filled with combs, potions, powdered wigs, scalding water, and soap that could probably strip paint, you know that someone might still look at you tomorrow and wonder if you've let yourself go. And in this world, where cleanliness and virtue are one breath apart, that's a dangerous suggestion. You lie down, pulling your wool blanket up to your chin, your linen sheet smooth beneath you. The dog settles by your feet, snoring already. You tuck a sprig of dried lavender under your pillow habit scent charm. You try not to think about the lice that will return eventually, the soap that's running low, the rising cost of vinegar. Instead, you breathe in the mix of lavender smoke and linen starch. You close your eyes and let the world fall away, filth and all, because you survived the day. And in the Elizabethan era, that's what hygiene really means. You endured the stink, the stains, the soot, and the sermons. You walked the fine line between superstition and survival. You've doused yourself in vinegar, scrubbed your skin raw, combed through lice like a priest hunting heresy. And now, under this roof of thatch and shadow, you sleep. So now, as the fire fades to nothing but a few soft embers, your breath slows. You're wrapped in wool warmed by the day's small victories. Clean linen, smooth skin, a scalp less itchy than yesterday. You listen to the quiet crackle of cooling rushes beneath your bed. The air is still. The world outside continues its churning mess of life and waste. But in here, you've carved out a pocket of calm. And maybe that's enough. Let your shoulders sink deeper into the mattress. Let your fingers uncurl no longer, holding scrub brushes or combs or herb bundles. You did your part today. You played your role. You fought back the dirt, you challenged the stink you faced, the endless, unwinnable tide of Elizabethan grime with grace, grit, and just enough rose water. You've earned your rest. Let the scents you chose, lavender, rosemary, clean linen, wrap around your senses. Let them carry you gently past the chamber pots and soap buckets and all the tiny miseries of a life lived half in shadow and half in scent. Drift. Let go. There's nothing left to scrub tonight. The floor is swept. The linens are folded. The lice are well fewer. Tomorrow may be another battle of boiling, scouring, and bargaining for bay leaves. But for now, there's peace. Just your heartbeat slow and steady. The soft hum of the world outside your shutters. The warmth of the fire's memory. You're safe. You're clean enough. You're home.